Hey guys, Dov here, and some of you may remember back in January I made a video, or a pair of videos actually, in regards to the Greenskins about what I wanted to see in their rework. Well, that rework has now been released, and quite a few of my wishes did end up making it into the game. Maybe not in the direct form that I would have envisioned, but many of them actually, looking at you, Spider, in the direct form that I envisioned. Myself and many others requested. I'm not going to take sole credit, but certainly, I will feed my ego and at least take some of the credit. I wanted to do the same for the BEASTMEN, though. BEASTMEN are one of those factions that have been left far, far behind as Total War Warhammer 2 has rolled on. And although I do think they're still very strong in multiplayer, contrary to most people's opinion, I do think they are quite strong. They are in desperate need of some reworks both in campaign and in multiplayer. Just as a reminder, this is mostly going to include things that I think should be in the free DLC rework, and I'll do a separate video on what I think could be in a potential paid DLC if there is one. So let's go ahead and dive in. My 5 wishes for a BEASTMEN rework. First things first, I want some kind of a feral beast mechanic in campaign for BEASTMEN. Now, there's a million ideas of different ways they could rework the BEASTMEN campaign. I'm going to punt on the main mechanics for the time being, but at the very least, I would love some secondary or tertiary mechanics similar to the Norskin monster hunts or Imric's Gotta Catch 'Em All dragons. Some way for you to acquire various types of feral beasts from each faction across the land. And now, that doesn't necessarily have to be like Imric-style random pitched battles that pop up, like the random quest battles pop up, or with Norska, you get them, in the Monster Hunts book thing, or it could even be where if you raise certain towns, you'll gain access to, almost like with the WoW mechanic for the Greenskins, where if you raise certain towns under certain conditions, then maybe you get access to additional feral units. But I'm saying all types of feral monsters. Of course, that's including like hydras, different lizardman type monsters, feral mammoths, even a feral griffin or various dragons I think would be super cool. Any monster in the game really should be feral game, as well as things like squig herds, herds of cold ones, and so on. I think this would definitely add a lot of animal wild flavor to the BEASTMEN and let you give your stacks a little bit of nice flavor and variety, especially if it's conditional on where they go, right? Like if you send one stack down to Lustria and it raises a bunch of lizardman settlements, and then suddenly that stack has like a Carnosaur and maybe a feral Bastillodon and a couple of cold ones in that stack, it'd be very, very flavorful, sort of give a history of that army and give you some cool, unique units to work with. As it pertains to multiplayer, in relation to this, I don't know why the BEASTMEN don't have the Feral Manticore. It is honestly a travesty, considering that the Dark Elves, Norska, Warriors of Chaos, all have access to the Feral Manticore, and yet for some reason the Beast faction, which seem most obvious to have, does not have access to the Feral Manticore. So please, for multiplayer, can we have? Next up, a rework for the BEASTMEN's army ability. Primal Fury was one of the first army abilities added into the game, and it still holds up pretty well. It's similar to a Frenzy, but rather than giving a weapon strength buff, it actually gives a speed buff, which makes BEASTMEN infantry especially among the fastest in the game. Honestly, it holds up still pretty well, and I'm not too down on this ability. I don't hate it too much, but the one thing that's a little bit odd about this, and not only this ability, but also pertains to the basic Frenzy as well, the leadership component and immune to psychology together on the same ability, you end up not getting the benefit from the immune to psychology, right? Because when you need it to protect from terror, when your leadership is low, your leadership is going to be below 50%, so you don't get any benefit from the immune to psychology. Really, the only thing it does is protect you from the initial fear debuff, which I think is only like -8 leadership or something like that. Really not impactful at all. So my suggestion would be you could do a few things with this. Number one would be to make both Frenzy and Primal Fury HP conditional rather than leadership conditional, so that the immune to psychology will stay on even when their leadership gets low, as long as their HP is still high. Alternately, you could change the immune to psychology to a different effect so that you're not missing out on that value. Something like Fear would sort of give a similar effect in protecting them against the Fear debuff while also giving them a little bit of not offensive, but sort of offensive power as well, being able to debuff enemies' leadership potentially. It'd be great against undead factions, and kind of makes sense for me thematically, like a bunch of beastmen, strange, bestial shapes popping out of the woods, rushing at you would be pretty scary, at least until you fought them for a bit and figured out, like, oh, okay, it's just some beastmen. I know what this is, because I'm an Empire man. I don't know. You kind of get my idea, though. That initial sort of shock factor could be represented by Primal Fury having a fear component rather than immune to psychology. Next up, we've got a free hero. Similar to Bob, I would like a generic gore melee hero. This is just going to be like your beast captain, basically. Hopefully he'll have some support abilities similar to Bob, maybe some melee attack, immune to psychology, speed buffs, debuffs, whatever, honestly. Just something to help support your infantry line, or you could even take him potentially on a chariot as well for more of a mobile kind of anti-infantry option. And on the subject of heroes, please, 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 can we fix Gorbel's mass finally, please? Next up, coming in at number 2, we've got our Legendary Lord, one of some people consider to be one of the worst Legendary Lords in the game. Good old KHAZ-WRECKED One-Eye. Now, I don't think KHAZ-WRECKED is really all that bad. He's actually decent for how cheap he is. The main thing is he just really doesn't have a lot going on. Besides his charge bonus, which is very good both on foot and on the Razorgore Chariot mount, he has among the best charge bonus in the game in both of those classes. 70 charge bonus on foot and 105 charge bonus on the Chariot. That is not including with Primal Fury active. Similar to the changes that Grimgore received in the last patch, I would give KHAZ-WRECKED a bit more support ability and a bit more escape ability. He needs an explosion style debuff so that he can actually cycle charge if he comes in on foot. And likewise, I do think that he should have primary armor piercing on foot as well, just to give him more damage. The AoE explosion ability to bail himself out on both foot and chariot helps to accentuate that anti-infantry role. See something similar with Cetra and other chariot lords, so definitely something that would be great. Likewise, he does have the AoE support of Apocalyptic Vision, but his support value would absolutely go through the roof if you were to make Scourge an area of effect ability. It would actually give him a really cool kind of specialization in giving AoE poison to your army, which Beastmen have a few poison units, but it would be an awesome way to imbue that onto more, especially of your melee units. And giving that, of course, melee attack and defense buff in an area of effect would be exceptionally strong. He would probably need to nerf the duration of this to something like 20 seconds, but I think it would definitely make KHAZ-WRECKED much better of a support option. One other thing about him on foot as well as it pertains to cycle charging, he just needs more mass. This is something that's true of a lot of characters that have mounts. If you take them on foot, they actually typically don't have very good mass. Like Grimgore, I think if KHAZ-WRECKED had more mass, you could use him on foot and actually utilize that 70 charge bonus, have it be a lot more effective. And last but certainly not least, we've got Malagooze the Dark Omen, and for him, I want a change that could even be seen as groundbreaking. And I think this change is relatively unlikely, but out of any of the changes here, this is the one that I would love the most. And I think it would not only set up Malagooze himself very well, but it would clear the way for other characters to have their abilities and traits fully realized from Tabletop to Total War Warhammer 2. And what am I referring to? Of course, flying. Malagooze should be able to fly. Just straight up. We don't really, right now, have any flying infantry lords. There are flying infantry units, technically. Harpies and Fellbats both count as infantry and are flying, right? So it's not unprecedented that there are flying infantry units to begin with. Having a flying infantry lord would certainly be interesting. Be relatively squishy up in the air, and this comes back again to the Feral Manticores thing. I do think you would need Feral Manticores at that point. It would require them programming in new animations and everything for Malagooze, which is why I don't think it's super likely to happen, but it would make him as a character so much more unique and interesting, and open up some potential options there to be able to avoid, like against the Skaven, for example. If You can have him flying around trying to avoid Howling Warp Gale as much as you can. The Skaven can't really challenge you in melee in the air at all, right? So you can avoid their ranged tools, shut them down very quickly. He could be safe up there, and just in general, it could open up some interesting options in that way. Barring that, if it ends up being too difficult, you could always give him the techless treatment and just slap him on something like a Feral Manticore, which I actually think would be pretty cool for the Beastmen to have a flying monster caster lord. Would be absolutely awesome, and it would give him terror, which would objectively be much stronger than him just flying up there by himself. But it would be a way that they could achieve a similar effect, or at the very least he needs some kind of mount, because Malagore's biggest weakness right now is he's very vulnerable. He's decently good in combat for a caster, and he's pretty cheap for what he gives you, but he is super squishy, very low armor, not the best defense, and very low HP as well. And because he's only a foot character, he cannot avoid danger. So regardless, he needs some kind of mount or mobility to be able to avoid getting completely killed, and it would be preferable for him to have his flying from tabletop realized. And there are other characters too, like Kemler, for example, I think with his Cloak of Mists and Shadows can get flying as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys who are more up on the lore will have to let me know, but I want to say that there are more Chaos characters. Like, does Valkia count as infantry, or is she big? Is it like a large entity? And I don't know enough about the lore to really answer that, but again, it's maybe some of these like Chaos Demons and stuff might be flying infantry types, so it's an archetype that they may end up need to explore further down the line. Might as well get it started now with Malagore, who should be there anyway. That's it for my Beastmen wishes, though. You guys let me know down in the comments below. What would you like to see in the rework? How would you go about fixing the Beastmen campaigns? I know I didn't really talk a lot about that here, just a few things, but I'm really curious to see how you guys would go about trying to make their campaign more fun and interesting to play. So look forward to reading your comments. Big thanks once again for watching. If you guys do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.